might not be from Krypton, but he's heads above the rest. His knowledge can't be questioned, you can put it to the test. So if you want to hear the truth and have nowhere else to go, I'll give you the solution. Just tune into his show and just kneel before Zod. Kneel before Zod. Kneel before Zod. Kneel before Zod.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Fandom Zone. It is the most earth-breaking, ground-shaking, but never media show money-taking, the man, the myth, the legend, the most electrifying villain in all of YouTube entertainment today. And today I'm going to bring you guys a review because I haven't done very many of them, and I've been intrigued on doing them, particularly because this artist is controversial and some statements he made at Cannes Film Festival put him under fire, mainly from the woke crowd, which is what I talk about here. So I want to talk about one of my favorite movies, which is The House That Jack Built. This movie stars Matt Dillon, Uma Thurman, several other people who are in this film that are, they're all right. If they're the kind of actors and actresses, if you've seen them, you know who they are. So this movie is about a man named Jack, and during this movie, in kind of like a very artistic way that they do these things, this was a 2008 film, so this is pre-Joker and stuff, but kind of that narration, we are following through the events being cataloged by a serial killer, and he breaks this story up into what they call 5 incidents, and each incident is slightly more gruesome and worse than the other. During the course of this film, he's talking to a figure we don't see named Verge, and they're having a back and forth conversation about the philosophy behind murder, art, various other things. And it's kind of an exploration into what the mind of a serial killer might be like. And I'm talking not Dexter style, where it's a guy doing stuff I mean like a brutally horrendous individual, a Ted Bundy kind of individual, someone who's narcissistic, obsessive compulsive, borderline sociopath, all sorts of stuff. And I like this movie because of the themes it tackles. So I'm going to break this up into kind of my pros, my cons, my overall thoughts of the movie, and then I'm going to do a scale between 1 and 10, 1 being the biggest piece of trash I've ever seen, and 10 being the best thing that your earth has produced. So let me give some background, because this is part of a series of videos I'm going to do on this artist, because I find him very fascinating in what he talks about. The artist is called Lars von Trier. Lars is an interesting artist. He started off with very cerebral filmmaking, very thought-provoking stuff. And I don't mean woke stuff. I mean really think about depression, about society, about the things that we do, the concepts of murder, and all that kind of stuff, right? Very heavy subject matter. And what I find out interesting about him is he's independent, but the way his films are shot are very clean. A lot of them have a gritty feel, but it's a really refined type of a grit to it. And I respect a great deal of his works because of how he tackles and approaches certain themes. Now, there's been a thing with this director that says a lot of his newer films are from shock value, and I caught him during this film. There's another film I'll be reviewing called Antichrist, which was kind of his genesis into this really brutal, visceral style that he has now. But this film was the film that hooked me. I heard a lot of buzz about it. When it premiered at Cannes Film Festival, people threw up, people walked out. Film critics berated it. So let me start off with the lead and my biggest pro. Matt Dillon is at his peak performance. This is 2 years ago, 2018. Matt Dillon had a string of successful movies with Crash and a bunch of other films that he did that started putting him on the top. This to me is one of the best Matt Dillon performances I've seen probably ever from this guy. His portrayal of Jack and the way he portrays the mind of a serial killer is at times chilling. Now, a little disclaimer. This is a hard to watch movie. It is hard. I've seen it twice. I own it. I've got the director's cut, which is supposed to be the most brutal cut that they left some stuff out. There's one scene in particular that I'll get to when I get to my cons that is kind of a little bit much as a parent. With that being said, I'm of the opinion that if you're going to put violence and gore in a movie and you're talking about this, it has a place. Now, a lot of people don't like this film because they say it's overindulgent. A lot of the director is into this film and things like that. But I would argue if you're a good director and you're making stuff like this, there's always a piece of you in film. There's a difference between a piece of you being in the film and you wanting to put in messaging that a studio has. I feel him being sort of over grandiose with his filmmaking is putting things that have happened to him in his life. And he's had battles with depression and anxiety and things like that, and obsessive compulsion, and it shows in this film. Now, does he toot his own horn a lot? There's literally a scene in this movie where the character in the film has a flashback to other Van Trejo movies in the flashback, and it's like, yeah, you are definitely have this sort of grandiose idea of your work. But at the same time, I would argue the character is narcissistic. And I think some of the narcissism of the character might be a reflection of the director. So let me get to it. My pros is Matt Dillon's acting and the way this thing is shot is amazing. The way that events happen are believable and are cut from different serial killer events. Like there's a scene where he literally talks to police officers while he has a body in the back of these woods that he just murdered. And he actually goes with them to investigate the scene. And there's a hint of him wanting to be caught because he's a failed architect, he's brilliant, but he hasn't achieved what he's wanted to in life. And it becomes more of he wants people to see his work, no matter what work it is. And these are his masterpieces. And the debates. Now, some say this is negative, but me, I like stuff that is thought-provoking. And he is going back and forth with this character called Verge about art, the meaning of life, the meaning of violence in societies. And their back and forth is some of the best dialogue I've heard. Now, there's a reference I can't say because of YouTube, but it has to do with World War II and a particularly bad figure in that war, where he argues about how people condemn people but don't look at their art. And a lot of people at the film festival got pissy and said that the director was glorifying this individual and what he did. And if you watch the movie, the context of their discussion is not what people were saying. It was a philosophical debate with a narcissist who's a serial killer. And what happens to him kind of is justified. So when you see this part in the film, I don't think people realize the brilliance of this movie is that he is arguing these things to justify his own choices he's made in murdering all of these people. And it's a fascinating study into what a serial killer might think as they do these horrendous acts, like what their motives are. There's a great dissertation where he talks about his need to kill, and he says, picture two lampposts, and he goes, the part where you're underneath the lamp and it's your full shadow. That is me perfectly content, right? And as I walk towards the other lamppost, the shadow becomes less and less and less. That's my urge to want to kill. It's becoming greater and greater and greater till he kills someone at the other end. And I thought it was such a terrifying analogy of what this guy feels and the value that he puts on life, the value that these people who do these horrendous things might actually perceive on human life. And it's really fascinating study. The end of this movie, the last 20 minutes are the biggest pro, because when you find out, especially if you don't read this stuff, when you find out the figure he's talking to at the end and what the whole meaning of the movie is, it's really great. And I'm not gonna lie, and we'll get into my cons. The cons of this movie is it gets slow in the middle, really slow. There are some points where a lot of it is about architecture and art, and if you're not into that, you might find a slowdown, but bear with it. There's also a scene in the movie where he kills a whole entire family. And now this is a scene that I believe was the biggest scene in the film festival where people walked out. And the context of the scene, if you watch it all the way through, the narrator that he's talking to, The Verge, and him get into an argument about the sanctity of life and love. And this incident ties into what he feels about the family structure and dynamic and how he sees them. And he takes them on a hunting trip. And I'm not going to get much into it. You have to watch the film. But let's just say they weren't hunting deer as he set up the whole thing. And it's quite, especially on the director's version, I will say, I felt what they showed was a little bit overboard. But I'm not going to say it wasn't necessary. This guy's an evil man. He's very evil. You get that from the beginning. And he's got a likability about him until you get to this. And this is the fourth incident. So the first and second and third, you kind of understand it's still horrendous, but you kind of get what's going on. But when you get to the scene, you realize this is a complete breakdown. This is a narcissistic, downright evil person who does evil things, that tries his whole life to rationalize his brutality. And like I said, the fifth incident, which is the last one, it ties everything together in the epilogue, and it's quite amazing. It's 2.5 hour movie, and I was never bored once. It's the first half hour is so fascinating and interesting, but I will warn you, there is scenes of violence. There's a lot of graphic things. But like I said, I don't believe this is violence for the sake of violence. This is depicting a very terrible human being who, no spoilers, but does get what he deserves. And it's beautiful to me, especially the ending. And that's the biggest thing I can say. When you find out what it all means and who he's talking to and where he ends up, the narcissistic arrogance of his personality and the realization that all he's accomplished is this brutality his life, but he never contributed anything and never succeeded in anything on a basic level of what he wanted to do. And then you see what his choice is at the end of this film. It's so well put together and so thought-provoking. And even their talks about violence and art and people's ability to accept violence in society, I think it really reflects what's going on now. It reflects people's unwillingness to talk about these tough issues because the way we've constructed our society to be. It's worth a look. I'd say for the first in this series, because this is the first movie I saw of his, I'd say this movie for me is a 9 out of 10. It's beautifully shot. Matt Dillon, it carries this movie, and it all falls on him. He's phenomenal. But the victims in this film are just as good. They really, in horror movies and these type of movies, they make victims disposable. But you care about these people. It gives the movie enough time at a 2-hour runtime for you to get enough of the character to know the person's flaws, what kind of person they are, how he views them, and what the reality is as it's happening. So I definitely would say that for me, the pros of this movie outweigh the cons by a lot. It's one of the best shot films that I've seen in years. It's one of the most thought-provoking. It's not, uh, it does ramp up the violence, but it's not as bad as people would have you think. There are some scenes that are, like really, really hard to watch. The scene with the family, I warn you guys, if that bothers you, you could literally skip over that whole thing and not really miss much. They kind of come back to it. There's two real incidences that are tough to watch. There's one with a person he has kind of his girlfriend, and that goes to a really dark place. And then the family scene are the two ones that are hard for anybody to watch. Me having a daughter, it's a really tough watch, but I understand why it's in the movie and it has context to it. So in the comments below, let me know, have you seen the movie The House That Jack Built? What do you think about it? And what are your thoughts of this director and what he presents in this film, and the things they talk about as far as violence in society and people's acceptance to it, and people's unwillingness to talk about history and kind of, just all of the different things that this movie brings up. In the comments below, let me know. If you like the video, hit that like button. If you're new, please subscribe. We got some great content. Watch us on Fridays, and if you enjoy this wackiness, join as a member. We got some great stuff coming for you, and as always, remember the only rule here in the Fandom Zone: kneel before Zod.
If you want to hear the truth and have nowhere else to go, I'll give you the solution. Just tune into his show and just kneel before Zod. Kneel before Zod. Kneel before Zod. Kneel before Zod.